Industrial light and magic has created some of the most iconic imagery that cinema has ever seen. For the past 35 years, they have transported us to worlds beyond the reaches of our imagination. Their pioneering and breathtaking visual effects have transformed the way we see movies.
We're all jaded when we go to movies. I mean, we watch all kinds of stuff that we aren't supposed to be looking for. We're looking for the seams, we're looking for the cracks. But, you know, when they make you forget all that and pull you into the magic that is the story, then they've succeeded.
Through their masterful blend of art and technology, they have revolutionized movie making and helped to define popular culture.
From the sublime to the ridiculous, from E.T. to the amazing work they did on Transformers. ILM loves to find different ways of telling stories visually.
They've made us wonder, they've made us marvel, they've made us believe.
It's wonderful to know that the tools are there to really begin to get what's in here, you know, out there into the world. And ILM has been leading the charge in that quest since it began.
The digital era that dominates modern-day visual effects was ushered in by ILM. Hundreds of artists work collectively to create complex imagery from a variety of elements that combine to perform a masterful illusion.
Action!
Through their technology, ILM has given filmmakers the means to achieve anything. Photorealistic characters and environments can be created from scratch, such as on Iron Man 2 and Avatar. But these high-tech advancements have not come easy, nor have they come overnight. The roots of today's cinema magic goes back over 100 years. But the revolution of modern visual effects began with a story in a galaxy far, far away. Industrial Light and Magic was formed in 1975 to realize the complicated special effects challenges for a new film called Star Wars, a space adventure dreamed up by a young filmmaker, George Lucas. His vision was unlike anything Hollywood had heard before.
With Star Wars, I want to do an action picture. I want to do something where I can pan with the spaceships. I want to do it where they're really short cuts. There's a lot of rhythm, a lot of pace, a lot of movement on the screen. I want it to be very, very cinematic. And at that point in time, that was impossible. You just could not do that with special effects. So when the studio said, well, how are you going to do this? I said, oh, all right, we'll figure it out. You know, I got to, you know, but I had no idea what I was going to do.
At the time, the special effects departments at the major studios were all but gone. So George Lucas was able to buy up old equipment for pennies on the dollar and set up ILM in a Van Nuys, California warehouse. With 20th Century Fox on board, George Lucas and producer Gary Kurtz enlisted photographic effects expert John Dykstra to lead the effort. Dykstra brought together a ragtag group of college students, artists, and engineers whose mixed skills in photography, model making, and mechanics would set the stage for the fantastical space saga.
Creating ILM to do the work for Star Wars was like gambling high-odds bets. We knew we were taking a huge number of risks. We were incredibly naive to think that we were going to be successful in doing that, and we were incredibly fortunate that George and even Fox, in its own way, were willing to back us.
When I read the script, I was just saying, my God, what is this movie? All these different genres are kind of together in this massive space film, and you're reading like the last 30 or 40 pages, and every page is full of another effect shot of the battle. Every page is like, this thing will never get done.
When I first read the script for Star Wars, I think I came across a few lines that were worrisome.
The description, unlike anything you've ever seen before, to most studio executives and to producers and even to directors, was daunting.
We had 365 shots to do for this movie, which had never really been done for an effects movie. It was really fun because we all knew that we could do it, because we had this nexus of talent that was just outrageous.
To create a believable universe in the pre-digital age, known as the photochemical era, ILM had to advance the use of traditional handcrafted effects techniques, such as animation and rubber mask creature work. Artists would use matte paintings to increase the scope and production value of a scene by extending environments painted on glass that would be photographed and combined with live-action elements. Detailed miniatures and models were built and shot against blue screen to allow the placement of other elements into the scene. In a process called optical compositing, ILM retooled a dormant optical printer that allowed for a record number of separate film strips to be rephotographed and combined onto a single layer of film.
I knew what I was up against, and I knew how I wanted to do it, but I was constantly bumping up against a technology ceiling. Sometimes you'd have as many as 100 different elements going through, and it'd take 24 hours to do it, and if you made one mistake with one element, you had to start over again.
There's no second chance. If anything goes wrong during something, it's over, and you have to sort of stop and start the entire process over again, and that is really difficult. And that takes a good team and a lot of concentration to get a high-speed model to blow up quick enough in the right way, or stop-motion characters to walk across the scene over a period of a 12-hour shoot, and it's only going to last 4 seconds. There can't be anything go wrong. No light bulbs can blow out. No, nothing can be bumped accidentally, between each frame of film. So it's really hard to do that.
It had to look real. And so that was the trick. We would paint ourselves into a corner and have to invent our way out of it. We all knew we could depend on each other. There was this kind of spirit of camaraderie, and so many of us gave our best ideas to the show.
John Dykstra designed the revolutionary DykstraFlex. This computer-controlled system allowed for the programming of dynamic and repeatable camera moves. The DykstraFlex facilitated the combining of numerous elements into a single dynamic shot, freeing up the stationary camera that had been the norm in model photography for over 100 years.
It was like we were in Florence during the Renaissance. There were so few places that did that type of visual effects, and there were so few artists that could do it. It was very rare, very wonderful, and it was a rebirth of the industry.
Star Wars was the beginning of a renaissance of visual effects, and Star Wars woke up a sleeping giant. George anthropologically looked out at the world and said, "What's missing here?"
First day that I saw Star Wars, I was one of those people, along with my wife Cheryl, that saw it and immediately went back and got into the 2-hour line again to see it right away. And we saw it twice on the first day, and it was just this transformative, mind-blowing cinematic experience. And I called George, and he said, well, unfortunately, we only got maybe 30–40% of what I really wanted there.
I'll never forget seeing Star Wars for the first time. I was in film school, and it was like, was there on opening weekend at the Chinese theater, standing in line for 6 hours, and the way that film entertained an audience was unlike any film in history.
To the world-famous Chinese theater come the stars of the biggest box office success in motion picture history.
I think the success of Star Wars opened the doors for a whole series of genres of film that hadn't been done before because people simply couldn't figure out how to make the images.
ILM was born out of sort of a rebirth of the beginning of cinema, which is to say, it's all a trick. And we're in the business of, we're the tricksters.
The historic success of Star Wars allowed George Lucas to establish a filmmaking center outside of Hollywood. He relocated to Marin County, Northern California, and eventually built Skywalker Ranch. ILM would set up shop in the nearby town of San Rafael, inhabiting a nondescript building known as Kerner Optical, their home until 2005. They immediately began work on the next Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back.
All in all, the real impetus of ILM was to keep a core group of creative people and the highly technological environment they needed functioning.
It was really clear that in order for ILM to sustain, we did have to find a model that would work for becoming a viable business and working for multiple filmmakers.
ILM opened its doors to the outside film community, becoming the first independent visual effects studio to realize the visions of directors with unique stories to tell.
First film I collaborated with ILM on was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Most of the effects of Raiders came at the end when they opened the Ark of the Covenant. And the effects involved, creating the power of God, I guess, of what was coming out of the actual Ark. The spirits. There were a lot of challenges posed. I wanted the scene where the one bad Nazi's face kind of implodes, and where Tote's head melts, and where Belloq's head explodes. I didn't know how to do this, and I just left it to these guys that had done Star Wars. I figured, well, if they could do Star Wars, I can certainly melt a head. And they did figure out how to melt this wax head they built. It was kind of genius. And that was all the beginnings of my relationship with ILM.
While ILM continued to push the boundaries of photochemical effects, George Lucas could see the potential for an entirely new way of creating cinema magic.
In the same way George had so much vision about marrying computers to cameras and optical printers, he felt that there were probably ways to create all of the kinds of things he did in Star Wars in the computer. He felt there were ways to do editing with computers. He thought there were ways to create and manipulate music with computers. And those three things led him to start the Lucasfilm Computer Graphics division that he hired Ed Catmull to start.
I was asked to bring in technologists and computer scientists and wizards of various sorts to bring this into this industry.
Among PhD student Ed Catmull's early advancements in computer technology was the ability to create smooth curved surfaces and wrap textures around them. This was a pioneering leap in the rudimentary world of computer graphics, known as CG.
I think their charter was to make a system that might be able to make images, ultimately images onto film that looked photoreal.
And in the process of that, the Apple came out, and Dennis Muren had said, gee, could I take 6 months off and just learn how to use this Apple? So he was the one that first put his foot in the water and learned what Ed and the guys were doing. And then that started the link so that I could transfer the technology that the computer division was developing over into ILM, which is where it was meant to be.
It was a very risky thing, certainly, for George to fund this, and also very visionary because it all really did pay off.
Today's powerful computer-generated imagery owes its roots to this early CG group, who by 1982 were able to prove their various skills to create a sequence in Star Trek, Wrath of Khan. While developing hardware and software, they spent 5 months advancing texture mapping, motion blur, digital matte painting, and compositing programs to create the first visual effects shot made in the computer for a motion picture.
It was mind-blowing for the time. Now, of course, it looks old-fashioned, but it was part of earning the way in.
And the minute Dennis Muren saw the types of things that could be done in computer graphics, it led to Dennis using computer graphics to create the stained glass man in Young Sherlock Holmes.
Dennis came over to us and said, why don't we try it in computer animation? And this was very innovative and very forward thinking. It was really exciting. I mean, it was a lot of work because back in the day we didn't have the tools. I literally had to take the footage and project it onto my computer screen, and I animated the camera move by hand. I don't know if I've ever worked harder on 6 shots in my life, but it was worth it because when Young Sherlock Holmes came out, people who worked in the special effects industry had no idea how it was done.
The Stained Glass Knight was the first computer-generated character in a motion picture, and the film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, a testament to the growing impact of computer technology. ILM's work in stop-motion animation and optical effects would advance further into the digital realm with George's next movie, a fantasy epic he asked Ron Howard to direct.
Dennis Muren called George and I over to his office there at ILM, and he said, we're beginning to use computers to work with film digitally, the first time I ever heard that phrase used, to sort of blend film images. So there was this one transformation that we needed to make in the movie. I assumed we'd have to do it the way werewolf transformations had always been done, with dissolves, cuts, and he thought we could do it in one shot, which was a really interesting notion to me. And he said, I can't guarantee it's gonna work, but it just might. And it was the first morphing shot ever done. And it really was more like the kind of magic that you see on stage, where there's no camera trickery, it just happened. And of course, there was so much technology behind it, and it was all breakthrough stuff. That was amazing for me.
By the late 1980s, the computer was threatening the analog ways of old. The Lucasfilm Computer Group had developed an astounding array of tools that remain today's industry standard. The first digital editing system, the first digital audio editing system, a film laser scanner, and a powerful graphics computer for digital compositing and high-resolution imagery. The Pixar Image Computer and its processing software called RenderMan enabled the group to create a breakthrough computer-animated short film, Andre and Wall-E B, which inspired them to pursue their far-off goal of a full-length animated feature film.
At the time, as the vagaries for finance come up and down, George realized he couldn't afford all of this because there were so many things going on. And so we had some meetings with George, and we said, well, we really want to make an animated film. And he said, well, that's not what I want to do now. He wanted the technology. So we started down the path of selling off the group to be a separate company, which is what became Pixar.
So we set up our own CG group within ILM instead of Lucasfilm. That's purpose was to do CG work only for films. And it was great. And it took a couple of years or so to really get it going. We did some wire removal stuff, then eventually we did The Abyss.
It was The Abyss that I think in many ways put a larger stake in the ground for the notion of digital characters in live-action films created by the computer. It ended up being about 90 seconds of animation. It used a mix of computer graphics and traditional optical compositing techniques, so it was kind of a transitional step.
That was something very new for us. There were not a lot of established procedures for doing any of this work at the time, so we just dove into it and we were making it up as we went along.
It was just so exciting to be able to see that what had been a promise for so long and so difficult to do because nobody had ever done it before. The tools were now in place, the software was in place, the hardware was sort of in place. It was a matter of applying them.
What happened after The Abyss came out was a number of projects that had been sort of circling, needing effects that couldn't have been accomplished before really started to rise up. One of them came out as a direct result of The Abyss, which was Terminator 2. After Jim Cameron felt that we'd successfully created what he wanted for The Abyss with CG animation, he then created a character in Terminator 2 that had to be done in computer graphics.
I think that was the real breakthrough film also for CG. We did all our work with digital compositing for the first time. There's no sign of any sort of matte line around anything or any grain mismatching that used to tip people off to an effect shot. It looked like it was right in the scene. So we've got 52 shots in it, and most of the people I don't think had any idea how we did that work.
In order to create the shape-shifting T-1000 Terminator, ILM employed a revolutionary laser scanning process to capture Robert Patrick's form and expressions that would enable them to animate and model a realistic computer version of the actor.
It was a lot of breakthroughs that we had to do to get that show done, to get the CG to work, all the reflection maps on it, and not have it just rip its geometry apart, and being able to pan the computer camera to match the background live action camera, so we can follow the guy's feet as he's walking across the checkerboard floor, and up from that grows this head. And that was really, really tough stuff to do. You know, it was on the cutting edge.
So everybody in this industry is saying, wow, everything's changing now. So then there's this general awareness that the technology is coming into this industry. So with that film, it made the awareness that something big is coming.
I was perfectly happy to do the dinosaurs, the technique that Phil Tippett had honed to a fine point. And we had settled on that for Jurassic Park.
Personally, I didn't think the CG was ready to do Jurassic Park. For at least for the close-ups of dinosaurs, I thought maybe we could do like some stampede sequences, because what computers are good at is, like in word processor, you can clone something a million times. You can copy a word and duplicate it 100 times on the page or anything you want. Well, it's true also of models, and so you could do it with dinosaurs. You could make one Gallimimus dinosaur and clone 20 of them and have them all running with the same run cycle. That's the sort of thing that's really hard to do with stop motion or anything like that. But we started doing these tests in CG before the show was going on, and our tests started looking better and better.
Until one day Dennis Murin came over to me and said, you know, I really think we should do this in the computer, and let me shoot a test and show you.
Dennis was working off in the corner. We were going along the normal route. Dennis then got the audience with Stephen, and part of it is to convince Stephen, and part of it was me saying, we can do this, I will guarantee it, it'll be fabulous.
The test was a herd of running Gallimimuses, and he didn't flesh them out, he just basically put the bones in motion. It didn't have that kind of artificial look, it was completely realistic. It looked like skeletons had come to life and were just running throughout Hawaii. And all the onus of stop motion photography was suddenly eradicated. We were both kind of wondrous about what this was promising, this industry.
We literally didn't know from one day to another how stuff was going to look. Every day we'd be looking at the dailies and saying, did we do this? Did people make these images? We've never seen anything like this before, you know? Where's the trickery we've been seeing in movies for, 80 years? There's nothing there. It looks real.
A visual effects shot starts with a line in the script that describes something. Let's say a dinosaur runs across the field. You start by going on the live action set and shooting what's called a plate. The plate is the background that you're ultimately going to insert that digital character in this example. The plate comes back to the artist. They create a virtual topography that reflects what they've seen in that shot. They build a character in the computer. They build its bones, they build its structure, they then come up with surfaces and skins for it. They color it, they give it eyes, they give it motion, they give it fingernails, they rig it so that it can be animated. So they take that photograph background plate, they take that character, and they animate the character in the computer space to fit into that photographic plate. When that's done to the director's satisfaction, they actually composite it into the scene. Once it's composited into the scene, it is filmed out of the computer and cut into the film, and hopefully everybody loves it in the movie house.
Here, there was not even going to be a thought in the audience's mind that what they were seeing was not absolutely real. And because Stan Winston did this amazing job of creating full-size life replicas of a T-Rex, we were able to effortlessly cut together the digital dinosaurs with the Stan Winston full-size dinosaurs. And the audience sometimes was confused as to which was which.
The major breakthrough really was when Steve bought off on the idea of making that leap from analog to digital. And that really is what changed everything. Once we did those dinosaurs, I saw that we had unlimited possibilities.
From the point of view of the industry, the turning point was Jurassic Park. When Jurassic Park happened, then that was like this big switch was thrown. It's like the world has changed.
It started a kind of revolution and an evolution that began to move faster than the speed of light.
It's a dinosaur.
I was amazed at how much ILM was able to accomplish and go beyond the dinosaurs with everything else they did in the next several years.
Transferring the culture from an analog culture to a digital culture was huge. Huge problem. Lots of pain, lots of heartache, lots of emotions for people who were, getting crunched in the shift.
It caused concern for the people who were used to doing traditional effects. You know, would their jobs become obsolete someday?
When I started working in computer graphics training, they referred to me as going to work for the dark side. The model shop were threatened by this whole division that was growing up. And I was one of the few people who made the first jump into CG from the model shop. Since then, been many, and we've all been, on the whole, been very successful. But at first, it was not considered to be loyal to the shop.
I had an interesting experience where we'd had a shot in the movie that was just really bad. It was an optical composite, and we redid that comp with some frustration, and people didn't want to do it, with digital, with Photoshop, and it's like night and day. So I showed this to one of the old-timer optical guys who had done it the first time, showed him both versions, and I said, which one do you like? Because I wanted to bring him into the digital world, and he picked the old one. And I thought, what the heck are you seeing? What's going on? And I realized then there was a problem here. You know, there's fear going on, denial is going on. But he ended up being one of our best digital compers once he came over to it and saw what he could do.
Right around the same time, Bob Zemeckis did Forrest Gump. And Forrest Gump had a similar importance in terms of changing the industry. What Jurassic Park did in terms of big in-your-face visual effects, big characters, bringing fantasy and sci-fi to the foreground, Forrest Gump did in exactly the opposite and understated way. Invisible effects, doing things that you couldn't do before, changing people's performances by changing the way their lips moved, changing the skies in pictures to create a different mood. All kinds of little things that, had you been able to photograph it that way originally, you would have, but you couldn't, so you manipulated everything to enhance the storytelling.
At one point in Forrest Gump, he's playing ping pong. And he's playing at this phenomenal speed. You might ask, how did Tom Hanks learn how to play ping pong? Well, the answer is, of course, he doesn't. He's just moving the paddle, and somebody's putting the ball in, and it's used with Rennerman. So it's this simple little thing, but what it meant was a story point would go into a movie, and the audience doesn't know or care about it. And we reached that point where it's not about special effects anymore. It's about telling the story.
So suddenly, visual effects has a place in dramatic films and comedies, all types of things that it just didn't fit into before. And at that point in time, everybody started to try to figure out how to dust off those old scripts they had that they didn't know how to make before.
As ILM approached their 100th movie, they would be challenged with the next level of realism.
There was the beginning of kind of working with CG creatures. Because I remember at one point there's a wall blew open and then a guy came through. He's the rhino. Okay. And that's run away from the rhino. And that was the beginning of kind of, okay, imagine now that's the rhino. The one on the right is an elephant. Phil is the hippopotamus. Okay, good. Okay, I got it. Let's do this.
Run! It's a stampede!
Basically, it's just fight or flight. Most of the time, you're just running. It's not a creature that's, having a dialogue. It's nothing that's talking to you. It's basically chasing you or confronting you or running from you, or you're both in a state of fear. I was amazed by all the larger creatures were insanely beautiful. And I found out that they had taken some of the programs from Jurassic Park and applied them to elephants and rhinos. And they're working you through going, you can't go there, you have to look over there. And they're going, literally, this area is a no-go. Especially if you're thinking, well, can I run over there? No. Why? That's a pit. Okay, cool.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
The tornado in Wizard of Oz, to me, just stood out as being strikingly real compared to other stuff I'd seen. It was beautiful also to look at. It had this, I'd never seen that done before, and I don't think it's ever even been done since as well, with that sort of beautiful cylindrical design.
ILM is consistently breaking new ground. I think that the visual effects industry requires that. Twister, I remember, got greenlit because of a special effects shot that ILM did, and we did a test, and we sat in the screening room at Emblem. Everybody loved the shot so much that that's when the movie got greenlit at that moment.
When we started working on Twister, we were dealing with
really organic materials, things like dust and debris and tornadoes and water. And those things hadn't been solved, and creating those elements in the digital world was extremely difficult. We had to develop our own particle system, and a way of rendering the particles was realistic.
In doing anything photoreal, you need to look at the real world around you to see how light bounces off of things or illuminates us, or how cloth bends and how people move and animals move.
ILM's stock in trade is photorealism, that we make stuff that you can really believe is real.
A lot of painters and a lot of the modelers tend to either fall into what we call a hard surface camp, which are things like planes, spaceships, hardware, and then you've got your organic creature type stuff.
What helps me is to go back to real things, to study nature, to see how a feather functions, how it's actually constructed so brilliantly. And if I can take some of that enthusiasm and curiosity, I can bring that into my work.
To create the reality, the visual effects supervisors lead an army of production managers, artists, and technicians to realize the most complicated imagery, on time and on budget. The starting point begins with the ILM art department.
The concept artists and the art department in general are sort of the front end group, or the spearhead, to get everybody on the same page, a starting point. In a lot of cases at ILM, they'll be designing the effect sequences, or the creatures, or the environments of the world of our clients, the directors we work with.
As often happens, directors ask ILM to create imagery that has never been done. The visual effects supervisor brings these challenges to ILM's research and development department.
One of the great things about ILM is that you have an R&D department. I can go to them and say, you know what, I need controllable smoke. It just has to do this. And you've got a brilliant team of smart people that can say, okay, you know what, we're going to make a smoke system, and they come up with the goods.
Everything that you see on the screen is meticulously assembled out of hundreds or thousands of different elements. And those are all there because an artist put them there. So much of it is about giving them tools to layer in greater and greater complexity, but always with the control that's necessary to give the director the images that he's after.
On set, the visual effects supervisor is responsible for delivering the live-action elements to ILM's artists.
When you're in principal photography and you have 350 people in the crew, and your day is costing about $250,000 a day, and there's a question and you need to answer that question, everybody turns to you, and you have about 2 seconds to say exactly what you need these people to do, and then they do it.
One of the things I love about this place is the ILM methodology. We try to create an atmosphere here where creative people are free to share their opinions about things. If somebody has a good idea about a shot, say it. And when people are honest about what they think, the work is better.
There's amazing times when you're struggling with something. You're maybe working on it for days or even weeks, and everybody's thinking about how to solve a certain problem. And you really get a sense of a community art going on at that time, where it's all been worth it, and they've come together and contributed to something that's never been done.
Nearing the dawn of the new millennium, George Lucas returned to ILM as a client with the daunting task of making 3 new Star Wars prequels.
George had to wait to do the prequels because his vision was so grand and it was so big, and he wanted to do so much that he had to wait for the technology to catch up. And I think what he saw in ILM, in the work that ILM was doing throughout the 1990s, sort of encouraged him to believe that finally the time had come and it was absolutely possible to achieve greatness.
I could sort of come in and push things forward as the owner and as the client.
We're pushing the envelope in a few places, but the biggest issue is volume. It was just the amount of stuff.
We were attempting a scale of visual effects that had never been done before. Over 90% of that movie has some sort of visual effect in it. We over doubled the size of our computer graphics department for that movie, as well as the potential change in culture of the company because we were growing so much. So there was the trepidation of, wow, have we bitten off more than we can chew, and can we do this?
It's not just that we have to do it for this picture, we have to do it for 2 more pictures, and also if this picture works, then everybody also wants it done for their picture. And what are we going to do?
We had over 2,000 visual effects shots in it. there were so many aspects of what needed to be depicted that couldn't be done with the tools that we had at the time.
It's painful, it's scary, and a lot of things, and you need somebody there to hold your hand and say, look, I'll take the blame. If this doesn't work, I take the blame. And that's why I've always done it on my own movies.
Okay, so listen, I'm doing my damnedest to figure out, well, how do we even do a shot like this? And okay, well, these are the techniques I think they're going to be the most bang for the buck. And geez, well, you just have to be able to animate that in 2 weeks.
We had very dense scenes with hundreds or thousands of characters in them. We had to do rigid body dynamics, cloth simulations, synthetic terrains. You know, the list of things that we needed to develop new tools for was quite large and intimidating.
The real point is how can we manage to change the operating procedures in a way that we can completely revolutionize the way we make movies so that this is all doable.
We'd have discussions back and forth in the beginning, you know, the supervisors and myself, and said, no, I want to do this and I want to do that. And they said, well, yeah. And sometimes I'd say, we're going to do it anyway. And they said, no, we can't. And I said, we're going to do this. I know we can do this.
What he brought to us was something that had never been sort of accomplished before, and he really pushed us as a company to grow and learn how to create such a large vision.
Do a big, complicated show like that, and you develop some confidence in the process of you take big problems, you break them down into smaller problems, you break those smaller problems down into yet smaller problems until you get to a scale where it's tractable by a single person. And so when a new big project comes in with some kind of scary, unknown aspect to it, you have to comfort yourself with the fact that, well, we've been doing this for a long time and this process works. It always works.
When I was asked to paint Yoda as a computer-generated character, I really remembered what it was like for me when I first saw Yoda on that screen and what Frank Oz had done with him as a character. That was a real honor to be asked to work on him. To get Yoda's expression, to get his character, was terribly important that we get that right.
The fear of loss is a path to the dark side.
In the CG universe, performers were now challenged to act in virtual worlds with invisible characters unlike ever before.
That was the time we created the Jar Jar Binks character. And a lot of people feel different ways about Jar Jar Binks, but the fact of the matter was, you had a living, breathing character who was acting alongside the actors for a large portion of that film. And it really showed that you could have digital characters integrated with live action people and make that work.
I remember meeting Liam Neeson after he'd done one of the Star Wars movies, and he went, Robin, I don't know anymore. I really don't want to act. I've given up. I don't really think I can. I think because I've just spent time looking at an X. I don't know what it's about anymore. Really, I've trained to do lots of amazing things, but now I've just been looking at an X for a long time. And if I saw him, I went, oh no, they've gotten poor Liam. Dear God, dear God. I would have liked to have worked with a Yoda character. That would have been fun. Because I've worked with the Muppets, and I can deal with the fact there's a guy under there going, I'll work with the puppet, I see you, it's okay. Syntax none have.
The dark side clouds everything. Impossible to see. The future is.
They would bring the puppet in so you could see it and get a visual of how tall he was or where he was going to be. And sometimes I had to walk with him and talk with him, which was kind of new too, because he usually didn't walk and talk. That was a whole bunch of new stuff that they were able to do with him. So I just had to pick a spot and kind of do it. I kind of like that. I'm an only child, so I played by myself a lot in my room. I made up stuff. And I'm used to fighting things that aren't there, talking to people that aren't there. It's perfect for me. So when actors complain about it, I just kind of look at them and go, where's your imagination? This is the perfect time to do what you want. I was very happy to know that I was part of something that was changing the way people were gonna make, watch, and create film for the rest of the time.
The Phantom Menace was released on May 19th, 1999. And became the highest-grossing Star Wars film of all. Its success paved the way for the next two films that were shot completely on digital high-definition cameras, showcasing the most extensive use of virtual characters and environments ever. George brought the original Star Wars universe back into popular culture in a whole new way.
You're George Lucas!
I take it you're here for the Star Wars convention. Oh, dear God.
Oh my God, George Lucas!
All of the films that Lucasfilm has made have become culturally significant in one way or another. And people have a very emotional connection to props and costumes and artwork because it's part of something much larger that really affected them. So when I walk around here, everything that I see fills me with memories of, you know, a movie that I watched, an experience that I had.
It's pretty incredible to see all of the costumes, and it was like nerd's paradise. All of a sudden I was 12, like, that's so cool.
No matter how much you romanticize a weapon or a mask or a costume or a character, you come and touch it and somebody had to paint it and build it and cast it out of foam or wood or plastic or what have you.
It's really wonderful and heartwarming for me to come up here and see these models that I built almost 30 years ago, because it brings back so many memories. You don't think about these things for so long, and then you see them, and it's like, oh gosh, I remember when I built that. Whoops, 10 people just died. It's odd, though. We didn't build them to last forever, and we certainly didn't build them to go out into traveling shows and be in museums. And so it's kind of odd to see them up here where they won't let us touch them, and if something breaks off, they photograph where it came off and they put it in a little plastic bag and seal it up.
When you see them and you realize when they lit them, they had a life. They were a creature. Yoda. To see Yoda like, moving not. CG take work is.
In 2001, ILM brought history to life like never before with the epic World War II battle sequences in Pearl Harbor, another series of landmark achievements for the company. In 2004, they created the first extreme close-up of a realistic digital human for Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, ushering in a new era for digital actors. The realism paved the way for the highly anticipated Pirates of the Caribbean films.
When the script for Pirates came in, the gag was that our crew of pirates were cursed so that when they appeared in moonlight, they were these tattered skeletons, which immediately brought back memories of Jason and the Argonauts. There's a scene of sword-fighting skeletons that's an iconic scene. That image came immediately to my mind when I read that in the script. It's a really fun opportunity to pay homage to Ray's work, but to update it with some of the newer technology.
The Pirates of the Caribbean series made extensive use of in-camera motion capture technology, otherwise known as iMocap. This advanced system of sensors records actions of human actors and uses the information to animate digital characters.
I mean, the characters were all created by the visual effects. It wasn't makeup. They were walking around in gray suits. And, it's very difficult, for actors sometimes to interact with a character that's just wearing a gray suit with a beanie. But since our actors are so well trained and so professional, they did a fantastic job. The most challenging thing on Pirates was Davy Jones.
We had motion capture trackers on him. We had all these silly dots on his face, but Bill Nighy was that character. And I think for me, that was the first time I really saw a direct transference of someone's performance onto a CG creature. And it was so complex and so layered. You've got all these tentacles. Trying to get them to operate like they really would is a major challenge, because in the computer, although you've got the shape of the tentacles, if they're going in different directions, they'll just penetrate right through each other. The idea that they would hit and react is just not in the computer. It has to be worked out. And it takes a lot of calculations to make something like that work.
It was just so incredibly detailed, and the work that, the model builders and the texture painters and all the guys that contributed to that show in all the different ways of just bringing this immensely complicated crew and ship to life.
Technology changes very quickly and gets better and better, so it gives the artists at ILM and their supervisors more fun to play with, more things to play with, more toys, and it pushes the limits, which is exactly what we want to do.
We thrive on developing new techniques to achieve something that's never been done before, so imagination is unencumbered.
Inspired by the original 1953 version of War of the Worlds, Steven Spielberg teamed with ILM once again to push visual storytelling to a whole new level.
Well, I had this crazy idea one day when I was doing my storyboards. I had sketched out a 3-minute dialogue scene between the two kids and Tom Cruise in the car after they escaped New Jersey. I began sketching it in cuts, you know, and close-ups and profiles and over-shoulder shots, and then threw all that stuff out because that wasn't exciting enough. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to do this. Maybe, what if I did this all in one shot? And then I had some of the previs guys come in, and I prevised the entire scene with a moving camera. That actually went through the car at one point, went through the back window at another point, went out into the middle of the turnpike to make room for cars that are passing, and then went back into the window again. And it was an impossible dream, and I knew it was not achievable, because I didn't quite know how to blend it. Where were the blend lines going to be? How do we glue these disparate pieces together to make it seem like it's one shot? So when I showed Dennis Muir in the previs, Dennis said, right away, and this time he didn't even have to think about it, he said, you can do it in 2 shots. I said, where's the break? He said, when you come back in through the car, through the back of the car. And then when you're pulling back out to the high crane shot at the end, the car moves off into the vanishing point. So Dennis thought that was going to be no problem.
I don't think there's much clue that you're seeing an effect in those things because there's no camera cuts. It's done much more like documentary style. And that's got a really great sense of surprise when that happens. It's much more realistic and immediate. And that's hard to do with any kind of effects.
Every little thing as a collection of what we do in the history of all the films that we've done kind of goes into every movie that we're doing right now. Transformers represents a colossal collection of all these different stair steps of ideas on the way. By this point in time in computer graphics, we have learned how to do hard, shiny objects, yes, but have we really conquered how they're lit? Have we really conquered a more realistic style of animation? Or a cooler style, let's say? No. We're constantly reassessing, what can we do better? Then we start designing the robots. And I think initially a lot of the robots were made out of all these questionable materials that look very CG-ish. And we actually started building a couple of robots out of like these bony fragments that look like, what is it, alien space stuff. We don't know what it is. Michael Bay, our director, and myself, we kept going back and forth on this. We go, you know what? This is not working. Let's just go to car parts and just start drawing from real world. Because you and I go to the movie, and if we see something where we don't quite understand it, it looks fake. If you want it to look photoreal, well, what does that mean? It's got to look like people made it. And so that's why we gravitated all toward, these designs that were more or less things that we know.
I think the transformation scenes from the first movie, were something that people had never seen before. So there were about 10,000 moving parts. All those pieces have to move and articulate with one another. Technology-wise, that stuff didn't exist before. So again, it puts ILM on the leading edge of technology breakthrough.
On Iron Man, we drew a lot from what they learned on Transformers. And that made me extremely comfortable with how ambitious to get with Iron Man. Because I've always been a bit of a skeptic about CGI. I think primarily because it hasn't been done right in many cases.
A challenge was, I think, initially to impress him with the idea that we could make the Iron Man suit look pretty seamless and realistic.
I love this suit!
The other issue was that there were some very beautiful practical suits created by what was then known as Stan Winston Studios. Robert, he was finding the suit very uncomfortable to wear, and so he would usually pull 1 or 2 pieces off just so that he had more freedom of his arm movements. It was clearly still constricting, so he pulled more and more pieces off, and in the end I said, look, let's pull it all off I'm confident, based on what we've done, that we can replace the whole thing. And so we did. We pulled it all off, and I was putting the markers on Robert, and he's like, I love you, because it was so happy that he could just now act and emote, and we would just add it all digitally later.
At one point in the process, I was giving notes on a shot, saying how I didn't believe a certain reflection. It looked fake to me. And that's when Ben Snow, who was the ILM supervisor, said, that's the real suit. So I was giving notes on the real suit, thinking it was the CGI suit. And that's when I knew that it crossed that line. And from that moment on, I realized that technology was a good one. It had passed the point where I could tell the difference. And then it became about how best to design the shots to make full use of what it could do well, and not to ask of those shots or that technology what it wasn't good at. And so I think a lot of times now when you see bad CGI, it's because of poor planning on behalf of the filmmaker, as opposed to the artists that are working on it. And that's a big leap, that's a big change. And so now I think it's incumbent upon the filmmakers to learn more about CGI, because it's a tool that's here to stay.
The suit is the star, of the Iron Man movies. When you watch that suit do stuff, that's what we go there for. When the screws come out and the boots come on and things come on his arm, you really wish you had one of those things. And the ability to make you want to be that particular character is the dream of, I'm sure, all the guys that are working in those particular places that sit there and go, oh, that would be so cool. What if his suit did this? And they make us want to be those characters. They make us want to see that stuff happen.
In 2009, director J.J. Abrams reinvigorated the original Star Trek universe through the help of ILM's illusionists, the first challenge being a new design for the Starship Enterprise.
The thing about the Enterprise was you can't really play with it too much because it's so iconic. And I just knew that we were dealing with those very vocal fans who were going to be pissed off no matter what we did. So I thought, well, let's just update it a little bit, but let's maintain its essential silhouette.
There's a certain level of pressure involved in that too, because I remember when we did the new Enterprise for the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and the first image that was revealed to the public, it sounded like they were going to kill us if they could find us. And we were talking about an artist relocation program because we're like, oh my God, They got so upset. And then it came out and they loved it.
The amazing thing is ILM took these designs that were done and they made this thing live and breathe, and they brought this ship to life. Star Wars made it impossible to do anything new. There's not a weather system, a terrain, an environment, a character color, a number of arms or legs. There's nothing that he did everything. It's, and in the last 3 films, probably exponentially more than, all science fiction films put together. Every once in a while, someone would whisper, remember, Star Trek came before Star Wars. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't help me, because George has outdone it.
ILM made the most of practical and visual effects magic by shooting 2 very different worlds side by side. Just 30 feet apart in the parking lot of Dodger Stadium, creating Kirk stranded on the icy Delta Vega planet was done from a partial set under the balmy skies of Los Angeles.
It was a really fun magic trick to get to kind of shoot those things so closely and yet have them seem so worlds apart. There's a step with lighting and rendering that is just unnervingly magical. When you get it, you're like,
You can work on a shot for months, and you go and watch one of the movies you've worked on, and it's, you see the audience react to something, you go, wow, that's awesome. So it's very fulfilling from that aspect.
It just requires an incredible organizational and artistic endeavor, and I think that the fact that it works as well as it does is a testament to how ILM is built and the kind of people that work there. It's an amazing team, a huge, amazing team.
In 2005, ILM moved from Marin County across the Golden Gate Bridge to a 23-acre complex at the historic Presidio. Within this house that Star Wars built, ILM's team of visual effects wizards continue to push the envelope. From their humble beginnings in a Van Nuys warehouse to a state-of-the-art facility, they've single-handedly transformed the photochemical days of old into a new digital era, changing the industry one film at a time. Over the last 35 years, ILM has created visual effects in nearly 300 movies, Their innovations in artistry has been recognized with 15 Visual Effects Academy Awards, 23 additional nominations, and awarded the National Medal of Technology. In dark theaters everywhere, they transport us to other worlds with their cinema magic, always inspired to create the impossible.
I think ILM's greatest challenge is, in a way, their own reputation, and continuing to grow and expand and live up to the standards they've set.
This work is very complicated, it's very labor intensive, but it's to some extent become commoditized, and the expectation is that the more of this we're doing, we should be getting cheaper, cheaper, cheaper.
The competition from overseas especially has been really hard when the salaries are so much less than here. So how do we work faster and better and still keep the quality up? And we've had a lot of people who've gone through ILM, set up other companies around that are doing great work also, and to try to keep on top of it and come up with the next thing that's better than what someone else is doing.
ILM's body of work is something to be extremely proud of. I mean, you go back and look at all the things that ILM has done. It's the history of movies at the last part of the 20th century and into the 21st century.
Lightning just keeps striking at ILM. That's the remarkable thing about ILM. It's not like they had their moment and it's moved on. They find ways to reinvigorate that facility by breaking new ground.
I think ILM's biggest accomplishment isn't any one show. It's that they've managed to realize the dream that any filmmaker would have, which is the ability to do anything.
The ability to continue to make us believe what we see is the true genius of what these guys do.
George made his company available to every studio and to every filmmaker. And in a sense, it was the first time that had ever happened before, where a company was formed for all of us to be able to achieve our impossible dreams. And George made that possible for all of us.